Welcome to Instructional Technology, a podcast from the School of Education at High Point University. In today's episode, we'll be discussing Microsoft Excel, most importantly, keeping up with student grades and then analyzing those grades for student progress. Let's get started. Here we are in Microsoft Excel. I can tell I'm in Excel because it shows me Microsoft Excel up at the top. And I'm going to use this to create a student grade book. So, this is my grade book. The first thing I'm going to need to do is put in some student names. So I'm just going to put in several student names here. I'm going to use the Flintstones. I have Fred and Wilma. And then I'm going to have Dino. And I'm going to use the Rubbles. Betty. I think it's Rubble, so I can correct that. And then Barney. Okay, so I have my students listed. Now, when I first entered these students, if you'll notice, their names kind of went over from A to B. And an easy way to be able to make them fit exactly right is to put your cursor between the A and the B and double click. All right? So there we go. Now, the most important part of this is determining how you want to grade the students who are going to be in your class, because you're going to create all of their grades for an entire 9-week period. So you need to come up with, are you going to do tests? Are you going to do homework? Are you going to do projects? Are you going to do labs? And how much is everything going to count? And you do this for just one subject. And so if you're an elementary school teacher, you're going to teach science, math, social studies, and language arts. So you can just pick maybe only science or only math or only reading. And you will think of all the grades you would keep for 9 weeks in only that one particular subject area. Now, I taught high school and I taught chemistry, and so I'm going to kind of use that as my example. And I would give tests. So I'm just going to put in a couple of tests here. And I'm just going to call this test 1 and test 2 and test 3. Now, I'm doing this to save time. All right, you're going to need to give descriptive names for your tests. If this were really my class, I might do thermodynamics test. Or I might say balancing equations test. So you must use descriptive names. Again, I'm only using these short ones to save time. So you will come up with the real names for real assignments that you would give in your class, okay, for every single one of them. And then I'm going to have a couple of projects. Again, you would name your projects. And then I'm going to have some labs. And lab 3. Okay, now, one of the things you also need to notice about what I'm doing is that I don't have homework listed. I never take grades for homework. So you need to think about what your homework policy is going to be. And I'm going to explain to you why I don't take grades for homework. One of the reasons I don't do grades for homework is not every kid's going to do the homework. Some kids don't have support at home, and they are not going to have anybody there to help them do the homework. Other kids will have their parents do the homework for them. And those are really just sidelines as to why I don't do homework. Here's my thought about homework and why I don't take grades. I give homework. I expect students to do it. But I'm giving my homework so that students could practice a skill that they have not yet mastered. So if they haven't mastered it, they shouldn't make 100. I would not expect them to get it right. I would expect them to have trouble, and I would expect for me to have to be able to help them. And so their grades are not going to be all that great. Well, that might not be a real assessment of their progress. On the other hand, if I give homework and they're all making 100, the homework was a complete and total waste of time because they have already mastered the skill. So as you think about how you want to grade people, any way is right. Doesn't matter what you choose as long as you can justify it. But just think about what's going to be beneficial. Okay? So I have these things in here, and now I need to put in some grades. So I'm just going to put in some random grades. It doesn't matter what they are. And I have to do them for everybody. And we'll try to do this very quickly. so that it doesn't take up much of our time. Whoops, that's a little bit high there for that grade. Dino always does the best in all of my classes, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you that. Okay, now you're going to need to look at the rubric to make sure you get the right number of students. Again, this is just an example, and I'm going pretty quickly here so that it doesn't take up much of our time because we have lots of things that we need to cover. All right, and I have one more student here to get some grades in on. Okay, and I have the grades in. And so now that I have my grades in, I might want to kind of dress things up just a little bit. So up here I can actually bold this, and I can center it and make it look, a bit more attractive. I could change the colors if I wanted to. And you're going to want to use different colors to kind of dress things up and make them look good. All right? And so just keep that in mind as you go on with what you're doing. So the last thing we're going to do in this particular segment is we're going to actually average our grades. So I need to think about how I'm going to grade. And you're going to actually need to write on here a grading rationale. And so my grading rationale is going to be that tests are 60%. And projects are 20%, and labs are 20%, okay? So this is how I'm going to grade my students, but now I need to explain why I have chosen to grade this way. And so I'm just going to tell you what it is rather than typing it in, again, so that we can save time. But you'll actually want to enter it in over here and explain why you are grading like you're grading. Now, I have test count 60% because chemistry is an end-of-course test course, and I have my test match the end-of-course test so that students get practice with that particular test. When students take an end-of-course test or end-of-grade test, one of the things they actually look at is how the student did on the test versus how they did in your class. And so if a student made a 60 on the end-of-course test but made a 95 in your class, then you have a large discrepancy there, and that actually looks bad on you as a teacher. So you want it to be as close as possible. In fact, my goal was that I wanted the students to do better on the end-of-course test than they did in my class. So if somebody made a 95 on the end-of-course test, ideally they would make a 94 in my class. But still, they would have it so that it was as close as possible. So that's what I was going for. So that's why the tests are the 60%, and that's my EOC part. My projects and my labs are equally weighted because these are the time where I actually relate it to real-world situations, and I actually feel like most of the learning goes on. A lot of times tests are because of state-mandated tests, but the projects where we could actually study something in depth or labs where we actually did experiments, I wanted those to count almost as much as what the test did, but not quite as much still, because I'm trying to get things to match the way it's going to happen with the end of course testing. Okay, so you will explain what your rationale is in paragraph form, and you don't have to list these things like this. You can do it in paragraph form as long as it's very easy to tell what it is that's occurring there. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do now is we're going to actually calculate our grades. So to calculate the grades, I need to have a column in here where I can figure this out. So I'm going to insert a column, and I'm going to call this test average. Now maybe I'll just abbreviate it again so I can save space. Now you'll want to make everything look nice and pretty. And so in order to do this, I'm going to use a formula. And the formula I'm going to use is the average formula. So to create the formula, I type equals and average, and then a parenthesis, and I click on the first place that has my test in it, and I hit a colon, and I click on the last place that has the test in it for this particular person. I close the parenthesis, and I hit enter, and there's my average. Now, here comes a really cool thing in Excel. I need to do this for every student in my class. So if I click on the place where I've just calculated the average and move my cursor to the bottom right corner where the plus sign becomes nice and skinny, I can drag and drop, or actually drag all the way down and let go, and the formula is automatically put in all of the other places for me. Okay, so that's great. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and quickly do this for the others. And so equals average, spell it correctly. And I can also just highlight the two columns if I want to, rather than having to type and hit colon and type. Either way works just fine. And I'm going to copy my formula down, and I'm going to put project average. And it would help if I were not dyslexic when I type. And there it is. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the labs. Equals average, and I highlight these, close the parenthesis, and I copy down. Okay. In our next section, we're going to talk about how to dress this up and make everything the exact same number of decimal points. So I'm just going to leave that for now, because the last thing I need to do is put in my final grade. What is my final average? Well, this is not going to be an equals average because things count different percentages. So I'm going to have to actually write a formula. Okay. And so here's the way my formula is going to go. I'm going to hit equals, parenthesis, and then test count 60%. So I'm going to take the test average, multiply it times 0.6 because that's 60%. And then I'm going to add this to my project average, which is 20%. So that's the project average times 0.2. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the lab average times 0.2. And now that's the formula for my average, okay, for my final grade point average. And I'm going to do the same thing I did before, and now I have all of my grades calculated. So in this first section, we have set up our students in our class. Remember to check the rubrics so you know how many students you need to have. We've done our grades. Now you'll have to do all the grades you would keep for a 9-week period. And again, I'm just shortening this up, okay? We have, and remember, you also need to give descriptive names for everything, not just these little abbreviated names like I have done, because you won't know what in the world these things were actually for later if you don't give them descriptive names. And I'm double-clicking here just to make everything the appropriate size. That's something that's going to help you when we get to formatting. Okay, and then I have determined how I'm going to grade, and I have written my rationale, so you will want to write your rationale. Once you've done that, you have completed the first part of our Excel student grade analysis.